Alright, now we are going to move on to the Italian 1870/87 Vetterli rifle system. Now what kind of ties all this in, and why I was making a series in the video, is the Italians were experimenting with converting their rifles into a repeater, a magazine-fed rifle other than the single shot that they adopted back in 1870. There were several experimentations underway, and they were testing stuff, but again, it goes back to the Russian-Turkish War of 1877 and the siege of Plevna, where the Turks, while vastly outnumbered, you have to understand, warfare was done differently. If the Turks had 4,000 men and the Russians sent 10,000 down, it was only a matter of time before they won the battle and pushed them off the field. The Winchester 1866 lever-action rifles the Turks had a bunch of, kind of went and turned the tide of the battle. In other words, the Russians did eventually capture and drive the Turkish forces back, but they hung up in that one town of Plevna and suffered terrible casualties, because when they got in close, the 1866 rifles probably didn't have much of an effective range of maybe 100, 150 yards. But when they closed in to overrun the positions, the Turks and those rapid-firing magazine guns cut them to pieces and held them up and inflicted huge casualties. So this started a panic throughout Europe. Warfare has changed. Anyone who had a single-shot rifle now was at a disadvantage, and everyone was looking for a way to get a repeater, which the simplest way was converting the gun you had, which this is an example of it here. And this is where Giuseppe Vitali comes in. He was more of an engineer than a gun designer, and his claim to fame is he designed the magazine, and he actually, I didn't know, redesigned the safety on these also, which was a sticking point. And I believe the Italians adopted magazine number 12. He had different systems. And where this ties this into the Dutch Beaumont, as we can see up there, the Dutch Beaumont was another original single-shot rifle. I'll move these down to get a better camera angle. And interestingly enough, you know, these Dutch rifles are around, but a lot of people said that this design of this gun was on the top 5 in 1870. They say this was a very well-designed firearm, and you know, for its time. But they ran into the same problem. They adopted this single-shot firearm, which was adequate. Now everybody needed a magazine repeater. Now, like I said, the one the Italians adopted was the number 12. And I don't remember what version the Dutch adopted, but as you can see, they look kind of similar, but they're different. All right? The Italian one, in its magazine cutoff, now these guns also had magazine cutoffs. The Italian one is not as complicated as the Dutch. Okay? And both of these were, you cut out the stock and drop the mechanism in. Okay? And if you see, the Italians have a reinforcement plate where the Dutch didn't do that. They just dropped it in. And you see you get these problems like these splices, and a lot of these will be cracked in this area, all in through here. Okay, so it did work, but it had its drawbacks. And the Dutch rifle had to be seriously modified. And if you look there, there's a lever, and its magazine cutoff system that is there is a tad bit more complicated than the Italian one, and we will go over that when we cover the Dutch rifle. Now back to the Italian conversions. Now, in going over the differences, there were conversions, and this gun here was built in 1891, so this gun was purpose-built. And the strange thing about it is the Italians still used the nomenclature 1870/87, even though this gun was not converted from this original TS style. Nobody knows why they did that. They just did. So how can you tell if you have a converted gun? Well, if the date is 1877 or prior, then your gun was converted to this magazine. The rifles, TS, Troop Special rifles, and very few, you will not see, the Italians did not convert to cavalry carbines. In the book there are pictures of them, and you see them. They were done, they call it the carbine colonial. So those conversions, if they were done outside of Italy in the colonies and were just used there. And how the author of the book has pictures is he went to several museums throughout the world, in England, Italy, in Ethiopia, and so those are quite rare. And I do not believe any of the Carabinieri style guns were ever converted, because I don't believe they actually left Italy. I think they stayed there. So yes, there was magazine conversions to the cavalry version, but they're extremely rare. Okay. And what I'm going to have to do is, there were several changes to the guns. Obviously, we got an example here. This purpose-built gun, the stock looks bigger and heavier and more, it's got some more girth and weight to it than the original TS stock. So I don't know if they restocked them or if the converted guns wouldn't hold up well with the lighter stocks, because like I said, they cut out a huge area in there, and they would insert this magazine system. Get this thing to stand up. You can see. Alright, so you see the Italians put a reinforcement plate in there where the Dutch did not. And this plate just basically goes over the original trigger guard, okay, and is added on. And there's another nut there up on the forward part. So I think that ties in to something in the rifle. We'll look at all of that, examine it when we get the guns apart. Now the other noticeable differences, other than the magazine, the bolts were modified also. So we'll take these apart and look at the bolts. And there was a receiver extension added. This was to help stabilize the bolt, give it more of a rigid thing or a guide in rapid fire. That was an add-on that was done, where this is not here. So there were changes to the receiver, and when we get these apart we'll look at them, okay, to where they made some modifications in there. So the bolt was modified, there were some changes to the receiver, the magazine obviously, the plate, and then the sights. Okay, the sights also had some changes. These older style sights are different from these sights here, and the sights were changed. This is the old original version sight on the this is like an 1870 sight. So I really don't know, being built in 91, why it doesn't have the they call it the 1890 sight, which you will find on the 10 millimeters, because they used the smokeless powder ammo. They changed the sight. That's the 1890 sight, and that's the older style sight. So we're going to have to discuss sights and all these other different features. So what I intend to do is, this is going to be the introduction video, okay? And then this will be numbered 1, and I will number them in a series, and I'll denote which one's the last. And instead of making one humongously long video, I will cover each point in a video where I disassemble the guns and we look at them side by side. Like what's different with the bolt, what's different with the sights. We'll look at the magazine and how that was inserted in there, okay, and how the conversion differs from an unconverted gun. And we'll do each of them, and we'll go over each point in its own separate video. And I think that's the best way to go, because there's a lot to cover on this. It's getting interesting. And then I'll do a video where I will look at all of the markings on these rifles, because you have to remember at a certain point in time these guns were used all the way, there's some reports all the way to World War II, okay, either in this 10mm version or the later World War I converted 6.5s. They were definitely used all the way to World War II. And when you get some of these guns, you're going to get some markings on here that are not Italian, okay? You're going to get some strange markings, and people go, why does it have like a number 2 or this or something stamped on there? Some of these markings and stampings may come, right there on the stock, that's an Italian, the stock maker put that on there. Some of these markings come from when they were used by other countries years later, when they were no longer in Italian service. So you're going to find all kinds of strange marks, variations, and everything else on these guns. The Russians were given a pile of these 10mm in World War I. Because they asked for aid, the Italians had them, started giving them to the Russians, and then they realized they could come up and convert these to 6.5. So then they kind of stopped giving them to the Russians and started converting them into, which probably out of this whole family of rifles, the most common version is the 1870-87/15. Okay. So that's how we're going to kind of break it down. And like I told you in the other video, you see the bayonet mounting. These guns all use the same bayonet, all the way up to the 6.5 version. I don't have one because dropping $300 or so, or $250 on a bayonet, I mean, I used to, but it's a little too much to invest in them. So I don't invest in the bayonets. Alright, so this is our overview, and this is where we're going, and I'll probably think up how I'm going to start this and go over each feature in the conversion.